Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to episode 12 of This Week is Live. I'm your host, Raymond Flotet. So glad to see you well. Thanks for joining us. It's been a nice vacation. I hope you all had enjoyed your holidays and had a very happy new year. Effectively, I personally took a time out to do as little as humanly possible. 2022 was super intense. There was a lot going on, and effectively just wanted to take myself out of the lineup card. I hope you all did the same. Hope you feel recharged. I hope you had great time with your family, lots of good food, lots of good rest, and you're steeled up for what is sure to be an interesting 2023. We're going to get into the normal format here and lots of cool stuff coming up on the horizon in the show and other video content that we're going to be doing over this next year. So appreciative of everyone who's joined us, who's watched everything from this show, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's in the live stream, or whether it's on any of the social media platforms where we post content, footage, or short clips from this. So thank you for joining us and being a part of this broadcast and enjoying the headlines and the stories we share. For those of you that are unfamiliar, we're going to start with a quick recap of headlines. There's been a lot in the last 3 weeks. But we always start with a quick recap of the headlines, and then we go into a longer story about any number of a variety of subjects coming across all the spectrums that Mixdown covers: music, movies, games, and television. So first off, tragically, sadly, and disappointingly, we're going to start in the realm of death. 2023 is off to an auspicious start already, in that very, very many incredibly talented people have already tragically passed away as this year has unfolded. Literally just since Christmas, in New Year's Eve, in the ramp up to Christmas, we lost Maxi Jazz of Faithless, Jeremiah Green of Modest Mouse to cancer, Anita Pointer of the Pointer Sisters also to cancer. Then the next day, on New Year's Day, Gangsta Boo, who is famously known as a member of the 3-6 Mafia, the Oscar-winning hip-hop group, but then also showed up on a couple of Run the Jewels excellent albums, Run the Jewels 2 and 4, also passed away. Shortly after that, legendary British guitarist Jeff Beck, who's known as one of the original members of the Yardbirds in their classic era, not the very founding member, but in a part of their classic era of the band that is very famously beloved. Also the Jeff Beck Group, and too many incredible guitar virtuoso albums to count, passed away tragically from bacterial meningitis, which is an awful, awful way for such a great man to go. Also, Elvis Presley's only child, Lisa Marie Presley, who's also had been a singer at various points in her career, passed away suddenly to cardiac arrest. And in the world of television, the legendary video interview journalist Barbara Walters passed away. And then, not to be outdone, literally today, David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, sometimes Young, also has passed away. Super, super rough year. I mean, not entirely surprising given the year of problems, the last 3 years of problems, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, the stress, the duress of everyone's health systems, the shock to the system that this world and this reality has been. But as we try to progress forward in a world that is now forever changed by that, heartbreaking to see the damage still being done. Whether any of these things have any connection to those kinds of things and long COVID symptoms, we'd have no knowledge of that. But ultimately, still very, very tragic to see in such a handful of days so many wonderful, brilliant people that we've lost. Secondly, now that the year is in full swing, for those of you who aren't big music fans, the world of music always goes through kind of cyclical, styles, where essentially as the spring comes, all of the bands start announcing all of their albums they're going to put out this year, all of their big tours, and then all of the big summer festivals get announced. Not the least of which, usually the first, but this time maybe the fourth or fifth, because there was Boston Calling, and then Bonnaroo has Foo Fighters and Kendrick Lamar, is the annual Coachella Festival in the Coachella Valley at the Empire Polo Fields. Coachella, not to be outdone, came with a gigantic lineup, and most critically for fans of Mixdown or fans of the show, includes Gorillaz, The Chemical Brothers, Blondie, Pusha T, Boy Genius, Underworld, Sophie Tucker, Bjork, Too Many DJs, Breeders, and Christine and the Queens. Now, for those of us that might be not 22, there's some things that are interesting to see, having been followers of Coachella for so many years. And that is not the least of which that, certain newer artists coming up very, very fast are way higher in the bill, or all the way at the top of the bill above people who in previous years would have easily headlined Coachella. So, for example, breakout superstar Bad Bunny is headlining on Friday over Gorillaz. The K-pop group Blackpink is the main headliner on Saturday. And then on Sunday, Frank Ocean, who notoriously has canceled numerous festival appearances over the years, having been announced for everything from FYF to Coachella multiple times and then kind of just suddenly backed out without much of an explanation. Nobody really knows why a lot of those festival appearances would be canceled, but he's going to be headlining on Sunday over Bjork. Now, that might be unconscionable for some people to imagine, but as the discussion has been, many people in Mixdown and out in the world in general as big music fans, the world is changing. There's a young generation coming up behind us. If you're 22 and you're listening to what I'm having to say right now, none of this is probably surprising to you, because how much does Bjork and Gorillaz mean to your world? If you're the Breeders, who are far down the bill compared to what their statures seem to indicate to those of us from the alternative music generation of the 90s, it isn't really terribly a part of what a young person's world might be. Everything is changing really fast right under our feet. Also, in the world of television, the very popular and numerous award-winning show Ted Lasso is returning for its much looked for season 3 coming up this spring on Apple TV. Not much in the way of details of what to expect of the plot, but obviously this will be a continuation of where the story left off. The erstwhile Nate coming something of a villain in the story, and ultimately going forward with that and 2 different opposing soccer teams. Now, also in the world of television, The Last of Us, finally, we've been talking about this show for several months, but is finally premiered on HBO. Now, The Last of Us is based on the incredibly famous and revered line of video games made by Naughty Dog for Sony and the PlayStation console. Now, TV viewers are all abuzz behind this show, and the numbers certainly support that, where it's the second biggest debut for a show in HBO history, second only to House of the Dragon. It did 4.7 million viewers in its first showing in its first debut episode, compared to House of the Dragon, which did about 10 million, which obviously had the benefit of the monstrosity that was the popularity of Game of Thrones from all the years Game of Thrones was on the air. But TV viewers are starting to find out what I think video game fans have known for a very, very long time. And it's an odd kind of thing. Like, you're used to, in the world of music and entertainment, people having very insular notions of what genres of music that they'll accept. It's unusual to think that there's whole mediums that people might just say, I don't want to be a part of that. So some people refuse to play video games. Some people refuse to listen to music. And ultimately, for gamers, and certainly there's its own degree of controversy about marketing and rollouts in The Last of Us 2, gamers have known for the better part of a decade that The Last of Us is an immaculate story, a masterpiece. And quite frankly, where in the world of video games, so much is all in the name of interactivity or fun or enjoyment, which is all totally fine. The Last of Us is a story that is certainly identifiable as a work of art. It's beautiful. It's breathtaking. It's also heartbreaking. It's soul-destroying on some level. But all the best pieces of art, it's entirely about what it means. It's entirely about what it makes you question about yourself. And people are already seeing the performance in Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey as the lead characters on their erstwhile journey. Joel and Ellie are already kind of enamored and enraptured by what this means. So for those of us that have played the games, this isn't terribly a surprise, and it's going to be gnarly to see people react to the things that those of us that have played the games have been so familiar with. In the world of video games, speaking of which, Microsoft, the owner of Xbox and creator of tons of software you've been forced to use most of your life, is now announcing, due to slowing profits and in an effort to cut costs, they're going to trim and lay off over 10,000 employees. Now, how much of that will be a part of the Xbox division? Currently not known, but those layoffs are expected to come very soon. And then lastly, and hot off the presses in the world of movies, another piece of tragic news in respect to the 2021 horrific shooting, accidental murder of Helena Hutchins on the movie Rust, a movie that was set to star Alec Baldwin. And unfortunately, Alec Baldwin was apparently the trigger man, accidentally working with a prop gun, testing it, trying to get a feel of holding it, and the gun went off. There was a real bullet in it, and Helena Hutchins died. Now, there's been back and forth for the better part of the last year and a half, nonstop since the story broke, about what was going to happen. Where was there going to be a liability? Was there going to be a liability? Alec Baldwin had announced that he had come to terms of some sort, undisclosed and unannounced, with the deceased family members of Helena Hutchins. But what's happened today is the district attorney for Santa Fe, New Mexico, has announced that Baldwin, along with the armorer on the movie, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, are going to be charged with involuntary manslaughter. Now, it's a little complicated. They are going to be charged. The charges have not been filed yet, but they're also not being expected to be charged and arrested, but they're going to be required to appear in court, apparently, possibly even over video if they don't want to appear in New Mexico in person. Interesting, I guess part of the modern era is that now video, Zoom appearances count as much as any in-person appearance. But effectively, a jury of their peers will decide what charges they should ultimately be charged with and ultimately what charges they may face. And if the jury finds them to be guilty of these charges that the Santa Fe district attorney is bringing, well, then they could face up to 18 months or all the way through 5 years or more of jail time behind those charges. Now, for this week's story, I've been thinking for numerous weeks about what I might talk about, and something kind of pushed its way into my brain over the holidays. And effectively, it's kind of where I've landed, and it's all I've really been able to think about since, as I was trying to take some time to just unspool my brain from the insanity of everything the last few years. When I was younger, there was something that I was familiar with. And if you're a younger viewer or listener of this show, you probably aren't super, super familiar with this. But there was a made-for-TV movie of The Hobbit. Now, most people in this generation are all too familiar with Peter Jackson's very famous movies that came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, the Lord of the Rings series, the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and of course, Return of the King, which were wonderful and eventually even Oscar winning. But on the other token, there was a pretty, no offense, Peter Jackson, awful series of movies based on The Hobbit, which is kind of the prequel to Lord of the Rings that came out between 2012 and 2014. For anyone who's a serious reader of that book, all you really need to know is The Hobbit is this very elegant and very fast kind of adventure tale, and it didn't need to be 3.5 hour movies. We're not going to go into the politics of that, but ultimately you've had 3 really brilliant Lord of the Rings movies. You had 3 really terrible The Hobbit movies. Now, for me, I grew up when I was very, very young watching cartoons on Disney Channel, and effectively there was a constant kind of rebroadcast of what was known at the time as the Rankin Bass made-for-TV The Hobbit movie. Now, Rankin Bass was an animation studio that did a lot of work in the 70s, and they did a lot of made-for-TV movies in the 70s, and eventually a few feature films before ultimately pulling the plug and terminating their studios. And, now their content is all basically owned by other big major media properties. But at the time, this was a special made entirely to broadcast on television in 1977. Featured a gaggle of very interesting and luminous people who, you may or may not be super aware of. Orson Bean playing Bilbo Baggins. He's famous for being a part of the old movie Harold and Maude. Richard Boone playing the dragon Smaug. Hans Conried playing Thorin. Brother Theodore playing Gollum. And this is important to note because if you've seen the Lord of the Rings movies and you've seen Andy Serkis's portrayal of Gollum, which is very famous and very deservedly so, you can see very, very much where a lot of his performances, I guess you could say, inspired by. If you watch the original Rankin Bass Hobbit, you can get a sense of where he was modeling his performance on. And then not the least of which, the incredible, the legendary, the brilliant John Huston playing Gandalf. John Huston, for those who aren't familiar, was the writer-director of some of the most famous movies pretty much ever. The Maltese Falcon, The Treasure of Sierra Madre, The African Queen, and also was the villain in the masterpiece Chinatown as an actor. If you've ever seen Chinatown, he's the bad guy in that story, the terrible rich old man that goes all the way through to the end of the movie. And effectively, he does a brilliant job playing Gandalf in this made-for-TV movie. Now, the Rankin Bass Hobbit is elegant. 55 minutes, 60 minutes, you're in, you're out. Whereas the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies were borrowing from the Silmarillion. We're going for all this extra content. We're going for all this extra information and sometimes embellishing on things you didn't really need to be there. The Rankin Bass Hobbit more or less follows scene by scene, shot by shot, kind of what was happening in the book, with the exception of a few little plot devices like this thing called the Arkenstone or the shape-shifting bear, Bjorn the bear. Basically everything that happens in the book is in the Rankin Bass Hobbit. The Battle of Five Armies at the end is massively compressed. You kind of see a bunch of dots flying around the screen, and there's a couple of commentaries here and there from Bilbo Baggins' character about how terrible war is. But you get every beat of the story, everything that matters, as the story goes on. Now, what's amazing about it is how kind of pristine and to the point it is. It doesn't really waste any time. It covers all the major bases. And the book is, as they say in the book, out of the kettle into the frying pan. one calamity after another. The dwarves are getting in trouble and Bilbo is bailing them out. And, the whole story is this come from behind person who isn't super courageous and confident finds courage and confidence in the face of unending peril, all the way through to the end of the Battle of Five Armies. And it's all about going beyond yourself. It's all about adventure. It's all about trying to take a step forward in a time when you could have had a very easy and comfortable life. And it's elegant, especially when you compare it to what Peter Jackson's portrayal of the stories were back in 2012 to 2014 and his 3 movies on it. It basically gives you all you need. And so it's a lovely piece of work. If you haven't seen it, if you're at all a fan of fantasy, if you can tolerate animation, I highly, highly recommend you go, you watch it, you rent it, you buy it. It's available everywhere. It's easy to see. It's about 60 minutes and you're done. You're in, you're out, you get everything, Also interesting to note that in the original Hobbit and of course the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien was a big fan of poetry, big fan of lyrics. So in the Hobbit, there's numerous places where there's just kind of conspicuously songs, things that various races or characters are singing, whether to taunt another race or just like, hey, they're arriving in Rivendell. Okay, sure, the elves are singing to them. This actually finds a way to work most of those songs into what the Rankin Bass Hobbit shows you. And it's even if it's just in the background for a little bit, there is effectively pieces of that have been sung by a choir or have been made happen so that they kind of help punctuate the scene the same way that Tolkien had them do that. But there's one song that opens the movie that has no place in the story, that was created just for the TV movie, and it's called The Greatest Adventure. Now, if you've ever seen this television special, you're very, very well aware of it. The story for here today is a little slice of my life as it pertained to, a transitionary point. And hopefully this is helpful for someone. It's always been helpful for me, probably one of the most profound moments of my entire life. When I was leaving Connecticut, I was graduating high school and I was going off to college, which was its whole own experience. And would I go? Where would I go? What would I go for? All of that was just this big mystery and wash of teenage angst, emotions, fear, dread, misery, all that standard stuff. And effectively, ultimately, I settled on going to Philadelphia to go to a college called the University of the Arts to major in multimedia, which at the time was this brand new thing. Having a 4-year major in multimedia was just not a thing that happened, which basically just meant computers and art, everything with computers and art. So as I was kind of barreling towards this deadline, graduating high school, what am I doing with my life? Where am I going? And oh my God, I have friends for the first time in my life, and I'm leaving them. It was an interesting kind of array of different responses and information as far as everyone that I interacted with. Some people were like overjoyed for me. Hey, we're so glad you're leaving. We're so glad you're going to do something. You're going to do amazing stuff. About half the people that I knew were like, there's no point in going. You shouldn't go to college. There's nothing different anywhere under the sun. Life is going to be what life is going to be wherever you are. And going to college isn't any solution. It's not going to make your life better. I mean, a lot of people I tell nowadays marvel at that, but it's true. There was a lot of people I knew, very well-meaning people who I still am friends with to this day, who very much kind of from their own, I don't know, cynical worldview, basically said, don't go. And now, of course, I don't think there was really much chance that I wouldn't have. So much had been marshaled, matriculation, preparation, loans, and, all kinds of crazy stuff was essentially going on and effectively was a part of what it took to make it happen. But I had a girlfriend at that point in my life. And, I think a lot of teenage romances meant the world to me. She was a wonderful person. I have nothing bad to say about her. Don't try to find her. For anyone watching this show, leave her be. Don't try to figure out who it was. But she was a wonderful human. And for whatever reason, it just didn't work. And I think we both tried in our own ways. I think I was at a very unstable place in my life at that point, and I think she was doing her best to deal with it. And one thing led to another, some kind of bad breakup, and it all just kind of fell apart. And, we stayed friends through that time period. We were still kind of talking and hanging out, eventually getting back together briefly later when I was in college, and that was a bad idea from the beginning. But point being, that moment, especially when you're in high school, heartbreak is extreme, right? You've never really gone through it before. You don't know what love and loss is. You don't know what it is to feel like you trust somebody and then for them to be gone. And effectively, all of that bracketed against I'm leaving everything everything that's been my world, which of course, for me at that point in my life, I loathed every moment of it. I totally hated being in Connecticut. I didn't like being around anyone that was there that wasn't my friends or my immediate family. It was always uncomfortable. It was always hot, or it was always freezing cold. It was completely bipolar in every sense of it. And it felt like everywhere you went, everybody knew what you were doing. You couldn't really just live in quiet peace and, be an unusual person like I was. And so effectively, struggling with all that, I'm leaving this all behind forever at the same time as I'm supposed to go to school and do things and learn things. And what is that even going to mean? What is that even going to look like? I'm hurtling on to life and adulthood and trying to have a career and make money and all the rest of that crazy crap. What does that even mean? And meanwhile, I've just lost the person who I thought was the love of my life. And there was this legitimate moment where I considered throwing it all in the trash. Just give up. Do nothing. Go nowhere. And I remember quite vividly that effectively a bunch of my friends, it was common in those days, had a large group of friends of many different kinds of folks, many different kinds of people. And sometimes groups of like 6 or 7 people would get together for who knows what, to silliness, to play basketball, to listen to music, to just talk shit, to tell stories. And of course, in this particular day, which was a very hot, humid Connecticut summer day, somebody brought up The Hobbit. I had a copy of it on VHS, so we watched it. And effectively, we basically sat down and we all as a group, 7 of us in my parents' living room. My parents were always really good about just letting me and whoever I was friends with, whatever kids, just come hang out. Their philosophy was always, hey, if they're, not outside, they're not causing trouble. We know where they are. Let them do their thing. Let them hang out. Let them hang out till late. At least they're safe. At least we know where we are. So about 7 of us were sitting there watching The Hobbit. And The Hobbit opens after the brief initial introduction of Gandalf and the dwarves with a balladry, with a song that was created for the movie called The Greatest Adventure. And The Greatest Adventure is basically meant to underpin what Bilbo's about to do, what he's been afraid of his whole life, just kind of being a mousy person who's very happy to stay kind of in his very happy little hobbit hole, lots of good food, never really has to be at risk, never has to be in any danger. And effectively, this is about that. Is this really all that you want for your life? I'm not going to recite every lyric of the song. I'm not going to sing at you here today on the show, but the greatest adventure is what lies ahead. Today and tomorrow are yet to be said. The chances, the changes are all yours to make. The mold of your life is in your hands to break. And I remember having been struggling with, should I go? Should I not go? I remember kind of looking back and forth. A good friend of mine named Matt, who was in the room watching this with me, and the 7 people that were there watching it. And I think he could see gears were turning in my head. I think he could see that I was processing this ultimate moment, I guess, as far as leaving forever from what had been my life of 18 years at that point. And as the story progresses, Bilbo's journey becomes that of, he finds that he's a person beyond what he ever thought he was. He finds that little hobbit hole, maybe it wasn't a prison, but it wasn't really giving him the potential to unlock who he really was. And the further he goes in the story, it turns out he's probably the only person in the story that has much courage, dignity, grace, honor, does the right thing, helps save the dwarves time and time again. And effectively, one of the lines basically hit me really hard at that moment. The man who's a dreamer and never takes leave, who thinks of a world that is just make-believe, will never know passion, will never know pain, who sits by the window will one day see rain. And I think for whatever reason, it was just the push that I needed. It was just that little nudge that I needed to be like, you don't know what's going to happen. And there's nothing but a tightrope and clear blue ravine, clear blue sky and nothing but a ravine beneath you. But you have to do this, whatever it means, no matter how much it hurts. Now, when I think back to this moment, because I think that was all it took, was just inside my brain, underneath it all. That was the moment where I decided I can't go back. I can only go forward. Have to move forward at this point. And it wasn't some big sing-song fanfare. It wasn't some big thing where I was proclaiming to the universe, like, I'm doing it, but I just did. And the rest, as they say, is really history. But the funny thing about it is, when I think back on that time, I knew that was the moment where it was like, yeah, there's no going back. That song, the balladry song, that opens this cartoon movie from 1977 effectively had convinced me there's nothing but fear for staying. You have to go. You must press on. You must do this, especially if it hurts, especially if it's weird, especially if it's uncomfortable. You have to allow for yourself the chance to evolve beyond what you are into what you will become, how that will become the next phase of you. And when I think back on it, because now, Christ, that's 24 years ago, 24 years back. Almost everything that I ever regard as being good in my life that wasn't, my family, my sister, my mother, my father, comes back to that moment. Never would have started this company. Never would have come to Los Angeles. Never would have met countless friends. Never would have seen and experienced the amazing things I've experienced. Never would have found that eventually I would end up becoming friends with some of my heroes, that I would end up knowing them well in person. They would know me and be aware of my work. I never knew that I would help so many people become better writers and editors, better parts of a team, workers. And at the same time, I never would have met my wife. Everything would have been different. I mean, who knows what I would be or where I would be if I had never left Connecticut, if I had never just gone on and left and gone to school. Sometimes in these moments, that very precipice is the scariest thing. You're sitting there right on the edge of what comes next. And thinking about what has gone wrong, thinking about what could go wrong, is enough to make you think, well, shit, something could go wrong. And I know acutely well how bad that feels. I don't want to have that happen again. But there are those moments in our lives where sometimes you just know there is no going back. There is only forward. And whatever comes next is in some measure destiny, right? The greatest realization of you as you roll forward and those things that you become. It's been an uncertain time for all of us in this world, and there is nothing but an uncertain future right now. A lot of desperation, a lot of fear, a lot of people not sure what can come. But here we are now, and in 2023, in spite of too much death, too much calamity, too much fear and worry, here's a brand new year. So happy New Year to all of you. Thanks so much for joining us on this week's episode of This Week is Live. So glad to see you well. We'll be back here every week from now for the rest of 2023, unless something unusual happens. And we'll be here posting these episodes on YouTube a few days after we do this live here on Twitch. If you don't already, please follow us on Twitch. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Please subscribe to us everywhere that we are as at MXTWN. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you here next week.